This site that we're standing at dates all the way back to the 8th century BC, when the people in Jerusalem built a runoff system so that the water that was collected on the roofs could gather in a pool, the first pool here in this particular area. It became known as the upper pool according to 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 17, and it's also mentioned in Isaiah chapter 7 verse 3. It was until several hundred years later, in 200 BC, that the high priest Simon added a second pool on the south side so that the two pools were adjacent to each other with channels running between them. And sometime in the next century, a number of natural caves east of the pools were adapted to serve as small baths during this time period as well. We believe that at a time when health was seen to be a gift of the gods, we have some references during the Roman period to some beliefs concerning pools for medicinal purposes and so forth. Vitruvius, in the 1st century, writes in his book on architecture, "For all temples there shall be chosen the most healthy sites with suitable springs in those places, where shrines are to be set up, and especially for Asclepius and Salus, and generally for those gods by whom medicinal or medical power sick persons are manifestly healed. For when sick persons are moved from a pestilent to a healthy place, and the water supply is from wholesome fountains, they will more quickly recover. So will it happen when the divinity, from the nature of that site, will gain a greater and higher reputation and authority." We don't know exactly when this kind of tradition came to be associated with these pools, but certainly there was a tradition associated with these pools and with healing. As I mentioned earlier, as you come up through the Sheep's Gate, the sheep were first, for many years, as they came to the temple to be slaughtered, were first cleaned here in these pools, but later it became a place of healing. And we find this story accounted for in the Bible in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 13. The Bible tells us, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Betesda, having 5 porches." Bethesda may mean in Hebrew a place of mercy, which would be appropriate if it was associated with healing. At any rate, in verse 3 it continues, In these porches lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water, when whoever stepped in it first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. So Jesus is coming. He's on his way to the temple. He's not on his way to the pool here, but he's on his way to the temple. But for some reason, he makes a diversion, and he comes to this place. Jesus, we know, had a passion for healing and a passion for helping the destitute. He comes to this place, and the Bible tells us, "Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be made well?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming another steps down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Rise, take up your bed, and walk.' And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. The day was the Sabbath." We're here appropriately on the Sabbath, and we're remembering that particular event in Christ's life, proving to the world once and for all that it wasn't Asclepius or any other Greek or Roman god. It was the God of heaven that was able to heal and to perform those kind of miracles. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of traditions here in Jerusalem. A lot of churches have been built over places where supposedly certain things happened. But thanks to archaeological excavations, there can be little doubt that this is the Pool of Bethesda. It is inside the sheep gate. We know of Antonia Fortress further up. We know that there were other places here. We know there were two pools here adjacent to one another. They've been excavated. We can see them in a few minutes. And there's no doubt that this is the place. We don't know exactly where it was that Jesus had his moment of agony, his moments of agony at Gethsemane. It was some that were there on the Mount of Olives. But we can be very specific about this place. There were temples built after the fact in the 2nd and 3rd century dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing. And there were churches in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and on through the centuries that were built in this place. And so this whole area of ruins behind us here is simply one church built on top of another. The church that is next to us here and that we sang at today is a church that was built in 1040. During the period of the Crusades, this church is the longest surviving church in Jerusalem that has never suffered any destruction whatsoever. Of course, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre we'll visit today is much older than that, but it has suffered destruction over the years. This church has remained completely intact for almost 1,000 years. And so it's a special place. It is also named after Anne, the grandmother of Jesus. And it is believed that Anne lived in this vicinity in Jerusalem. That's probably a little bit more of tradition than the Pool of Bethesda location here is. But certainly it's one of the most wonderful churches to come and sing at here in Jerusalem. We're standing here in front of the southern pool of the Pool of Bethesda. What we see behind us is not really the remains of the pool, but we're looking at what we call in archaeology a bulk. This is the cut remains after archaeologists have systematically dug through and excavated. What you see is the stratigraphy, the various layers of what is left behind. You see stone walls that are jutting out, various periods. You see somebody mentioned a railroad tie. I don't know what beam that is, but you've got all this stratigraphy going on here as this has been filled up. You have to remember again, Jerusalem has been destroyed many times in antiquity and continues even today to be built up somewhat in that fashion. The pool itself was quite deep. You can see the surface that's been cut over here in the beginning of the plastering over there as this is the area here of the bedrock. We're standing pretty much on the bedrock here. The towers that you see over here supported a later church, so those are not really related to the 5 porticos that we talked about before. But this is certainly the southern pool here. The northern pool would have been over here behind us. So again, we're standing in the midst of all kinds of archaeological or historical architectural buildup of temples and churches that have been built here over the years next to these pools because of their significance and because of their history.